All right, here we are. Come on in, uh, brothers and sisters, neighbors and friends. Come on in. Dr. Lewis, good to see you. Mr. Jolly, good to see you. Good to see. I see some new faces. I see some regulars. Wonderful. Brother Cook, good to see you. I saw your wife at one of our previous webinars. I forget which one it was, but it's good to see the Cooks connected after all these years. All right, everybody, we are on our Wealth on Wednesdays webinar. Uh, and as the latecomers come in, we're going to get started. Tamika's with me. You know Tamika, she's the executive director of the dfree Global Foundation and in charge of all things dfree Academy and $1 Billion Challenge. Janiyah Lake is our deputy director, and she works with Tamika every minute of every day, trying to help our people become financially free. I've got a great conversation starting today. Behind the scenes, we've got Michelle and Briar who work on my team, and they just help things happen the way they ought to happen. Listen, Tamika and Janiyah, I want to say this. You know, I spent some time in the dfree Online Academy over the last couple of weeks because I've been reading the reports, but I had not really experienced the platform. And having done so, I want to commend you for kind of pulling together all the pieces, building out a platform that's user-friendly, that collects data and produces concrete outcomes. And I think now that we've gone through one cohort, or I call it the first round of participants, we've tweaked it, and now we're ready to really launch into the deep and invite all of Black America to come on and go through the dfree process. You think I'm right?
I think you're right. I think you're right.
That's good. That's good. The team in Ghana seems to be highly functional. I talked to Angela, and her team is working on helping us get ready for the new campaign that we'll announce in a minute. I'm going to make a short announcement before we get to today's subject, and then we'll do a longer announcement before we close, because I'm afraid if I don't say something now, the people who have to leave early will miss it.
Right.
But if I don't do it later, the people who are late will miss it. So we'll do a front end and a back end. Are we still doing Monday nights live?
Absolutely. So Monday Night Live is still happening, 7 p.m. for our Academy participants and the general public. So you want to come and see how we do dfree and how we experience the movement, then you are more than welcome to join us. And you can register directly from the website.
Today's subject is the cannabis industry. And before we get to that subject, and to a young man for whom I have great respect, he's taught me so much just in the last few weeks. In fact, he's taught me a lot in the last couple of days about this growing industry, this growing phenomenon. But I do want to say this. A few months ago, I was invited to both be a speaker and to be on the advisory committee for a Juneteenth Unity Festival. And at that time, the sponsors, at that time, the sponsors believed that by Juneteenth, June 19th, it would be a live event at the mall in Washington, D.C. And so they got a permit and they started inviting artists. I know, Earth, Wind and Fire is committed, and some other entertainers. And of course, as time proceeded, they realized it would have to be a virtual event and not a live event. And so I'm still on the advisory committee, and I pre-recorded some speaking roles at this event on June 19th. And the more I went to these meetings, the more it occurred to me that in the 16 years we've been talking about financial freedom under the dfree banner, we've never really done anything special around Juneteenth. Mm-hmm. And since Juneteenth celebrates freedom from chattel slavery, and we keep talking about freedom from financial slavery vis-a-vis debt, it just seemed like a perfect thing to do, especially since the two of you have done so much work to make sure we have this platform that's free that people can use to not only celebrate freedom, but actually achieve freedom. And as I listen to these testimonies on Monday night, which are phenomenal, anybody who wants to be encouraged that people can do better even before they get a raise from their jobs or they hit the lottery, you need to join us on Monday night at 7 o'clock and just hear people describe the victories that they're achieving financially. So I decided that since I'm involved in this Juneteenth celebration anyway, and since the dfree Global Foundation is ready to invite all of Black America to the new online platform, that we would do a real push organizationally to invite people to celebrate Juneteenth, not only on Juneteenth, but to use Juneteenth as a launch date for the achievement of our own financial freedom. So I know you've done a little more work on the concept. I threw the concept out. You ladies have put some meat on the bones. Tell those who are with us now where we're going to take our Juneteenth campaign.
So first and foremost, we are finally celebrating it. Like we said, we are going to be having a special campaign meeting on this coming Monday, the 17th at 8 p.m. to give folks an opportunity to share dfree. I know a lot of you, there are a lot of people on this webinar that have experienced dfree at some level, even if it's just the webinar series. And so we are recruiting ambassadors to help us spread the word, because again, you know, we don't just want to be physically free, we want to be financially free. And what better way to get that kicked off than Juneteenth? And so we have a special meeting scheduled this Monday. We just dropped the link in the chat where we will invite you to be a Juneteenth ambassador. If you're interested in sharing dfree, we'll give you all the tools and resources for that. A part of the campaign, our idea is to get as many people as possible to commit to launching dfree within the Academy on Juneteenth or shortly thereafter. So if you're a group leader or if you have friends and y'all want to make a statement around Juneteenth and not just wear t-shirts and have a barbecue, you know, commit to launching a financial freedom initiative within your family, within your community. And so you can learn more about doing that on the 17th. If you missed the meeting, don't worry about it. You'll hear plenty as we make our way from May 17th to June 19th so that we can really celebrate and take action on Juneteenth to show people that financial freedom is critical to our overall freedom as a people.
Right. So this will be a 30-day commitment from May 19th to June 19th. We launch it Monday night. We'll give you details. You don't have to sign up and worry about how to get out of it. You won't be trying to get out of it when you're 90 years old, like a Sunday school teacher. But we're trying to pull together all of our friends, all of our supporters, all of our activists, all of our Academy graduates, and collectively recruit, train, and motivate people to do what we know dfree can help us do. So we'll talk more about it Monday night. But if you're interested in knowing more about being a Juneteenth ambassador with and for dfree, let us know. We're going to participate in the national broadcast, the nationals, what do they call that? Stream celebration on Juneteenth. Listen, if for no other reason, you ought to want to see Earth, Wind, and Fire. Now, there's some other artists that are signing up, some that young people know, but it's worth having a Juneteenth just to see Philip Bailey and Verdine White and all of those Earth, Wind, and Fire guys back together. All right, enough for Juneteenth. When I was a teenager, and you'll hear this in the interview, I had a friend who wrote numbers and went to jail. And by the time he came out, the lottery was legal. So he went to jail for something the government decided was a good idea. Now that I'm grown, I've got friends that are in jail for selling marijuana. And by the time they get out, marijuana will be legal, because they changed the name to dress it up. You know how people, you know, they're not calling it marijuana and weed and Mary Jane. It's cannabis now. So we're going to talk with Jay Jackson. Jay Jackson is a young man. He graduated from South Brunswick High School in New Jersey, went to Howard University. outstanding young man, always, has always been a stand-up guy. I performed his wedding, and I just can't believe that he's grown into this major entrepreneurial business guru around an industry that some liken to the next Go Rush. And so, Jay Jackson, welcome to the Wednesday webinar for dfree. James, by the way, is also on the board of the dfree Global Foundation. So he's giving back even as he grows. And James and I had a conversation yesterday about his knowledge related to the cannabis industry. And we're going to share that conversation with you. You can ask questions along the way, and Jay is right here. You can see him. He'll answer questions along the way in the chat, and then we'll come back and do a wrap up when the conversation ends. All right. So let me introduce to the dfree world at large, Brother Jay Jackson, graduate of Howard University, explaining and teaching about the cannabis industry. Let's go to the conversation. All right, everybody. Hello. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for coming by. Thank you for spending time every Wednesday. We try to talk about some aspect of wealth. On Wednesday, we don't say Black wealth. I don't feel the need to put the word Black in front of everything I do because I'm Black. And so Black is just a given. It's kind of like Christian, you know, Christian cleaners, Christian ice cream. I don't feel the need to put the word Christian in front of everything because I am a Christian and I'm Black. So I just go straight to the topic. And our topic today is one that I wrestled with. I wrestled with it personally. I wrestled with it professionally. And I wrestled with it because I have just had mixed emotions about this new industry. I've had different perspectives thrown at me. I've had different companies solicit my support. I've had different politicians ask me for policy recommendations. And so I find myself now in a position to discuss this topic because, first of all, it's an important topic. It's not going anywhere. But the main reason is because my guest today is someone that I've known almost all of his life. I trust him to be a man of integrity. I trust his mind. He's done more research on this subject than I'll ever do. He has probably forgotten more than I'll ever learn. And of course, the subject for the day is the cannabis industry. When I was coming up, we just called it marijuana, or we called it, we actually called it Mary Jane back in the day. And then when the next crowd came up, they just called it weed. Now there are other nicknames for it, but today we've kind of grown up into the use of very technical language. And so we're talking about the cannabis industry. It's the legalization of marijuana that has been winding its way through the corridors of public policy for a number of years. A few states are far ahead of other states. There are some states, I think Colorado is probably the first state to really completely legalize it, but I'll defer to my expert. But the young man I'm talking about is a young man who went to Howard University, and after having gone to high school and schools all in New Jersey, went to Howard and has worked in the insurance industry for a number of years and now has zoomed in on the risk and the rewards, the liabilities and the opportunities of the cannabis industry. And so he's going to take us to school today. I want you to type your questions or comments in the chat, and I want you to take notes, and I want you to be non-judgmental. This is not about judging. We're talking about reality. You know, I'm a preacher, but I'm a reality-based preacher. And so today, let me introduce to some and present to everybody who needs to know my young friend and leader on this issue, Brother Jay Jackson. Jay, thank you for being with me today.
Appreciate you for having me, Dr. Swords. It's an honor to be on your show. And like you said, known you mostly all of my life, and I've always respected everything you've done in this space, and further respect you being progressive and being open to having the conversation around cannabis, which a lot of people are not willing to do right now. But to your point, this is a huge wealth opportunity. It's not going anywhere, and before we know it, next 2 to 5 years, it's going to be federally legal.
So Jay, yeah, that's one of the points I want to get to. But let me deal with. Can I just talk about my attitude first? My attitude. When I was a teenager, my best friend was about 15 years my senior. He owned a little corner store where all of us bought our sandwiches. Y'all call them hoagies now, but they were just sandwiches. And he also sold numbers from his store. Now, for you younger people who don't know what numbers are, you played the numbers with, it was illegal, first of all. And you would give a guy $2 or $3, and if the number that you played matched the last 3 numbers in one of the racetracks, the amount of money brought in from the racetrack, you hit the number. And that was an illegal lottery system, basically. And my friend got caught and went to jail for selling numbers. By the time he came out of jail, the lottery was legal. So now you had the state selling numbers, and it was legal after my friend served time. I now have friends in jail for selling weed, marijuana. And I have an attitude. I've always had an attitude, because now that so-called cannabis is legal, what happens to my friends that went to jail for doing what is now legal? Is there anything in the legislation that brings some relief to these young people that went to jail for doing what was illegal then?
Yeah, so if we're talking specifically about New Jersey, there are laws that are put in place to allow folks to be able to expunge those records, right?
Really?
However, they have to be within certain parameters. And, unfortunately, if your friends were, kingpins and they were, really selling at a high level, that may not include them, right? The other thing about it is, I guess one thing that I would have liked to see in New Jersey, and I've seen around the country in different states, is automatic expungement, right? Which means that if somebody falls within those parameters, that record is automatically taken off of their record, and moving forward, that wouldn't be able to be seen by state agencies as well as jobs or anything that they were trying to get, moving forward in their lives. Unfortunately, in New Jersey, you do have to go through an expungement process, which requires you to hire an attorney, go through the process, send their appropriate documents. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, that process is a little bit slower than it normally would be, right? And exactly what you said, Dr. Sores, is kind of the unfortunate part. You look at the cannabis industry, right? And folks that essentially started this industry, grew this industry, made this industry popular in the legacy market, not only are being jailed for it, not let out of jail, but they're also not being allowed into the legal side of the industry, right?
That was my question. My question is, if I was arrested and have a record for having sold weed illegally, are you telling me that at least in New Jersey, I can't qualify to sell it legally?
So in New Jersey, you can qualify, right? So they have created a provision that allows folks that have cannabis arrests on their record to be able to qualify for the different license types, right? Now, the bigger issue is, as a community, as a people, there's not a lot of institutional money in cannabis right now, right? So essentially, the barrier to entry is so great for folks in our community, because if you don't have the network, meaning the personal network, or friends and family to be able to go to, or relationships with venture capitalists or family-owned offices to be able to, either borrow or sell pieces of equity off of your company to be able to have this money to go after it, there's not a shot. This is a very expensive industry to be able to get into, because of the building blocks and the pieces that it take to even put in an application.
All right, now you just in 90 seconds, you just lost 90% of our audience because you used some technical terms, and I'm going to come back and let you go deeply into them. But what I want to say to the audience is, I know we've got a big audience in Louisiana. We have a big audience in the DMV. What Brother Jay is saying suggests that each of us should look at the laws of our state. Now, again, I'm a pastor, but as a pastor, it's my job to advocate for opportunities and for justice. And you can't advocate if you don't know the rules. And so I would urge all of you, California, all of you that are in our network, you need to research the laws of your state, because the next section of what Brother Jackson is going to talk about is going to reveal to you the economics. And that's why we're here. We're talking about um, access to economic opportunity. This is dfree. And dfree is not just about getting out of debt, but dfree wants to help us expand our income, expand our economic base. You don't get out of debt and then act like you're free. Getting out of debt is the first step towards financial freedom, owning and being an entrepreneur and investing. So that's why we're here. We're here because this opportunity is economic. We went through some of the legal and policy issues, but Jay Jackson now has introduced us to the whole idea of financing and investing in this business. So what you're telling me, I think what you're telling me is this: I've got a big backyard, and I can't just go get some weed seeds and plant them in my backyard and, and open up shop. It's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than that. And even to dive deeper into what you said, unfortunately, in the state of New Jersey, for even medical patients, you're not allowed to grow any cannabis at home, right? You have other states, you have, Illinois, California, Michigan, number of states that allow home grow specifically for medical patients to be able to grow their own medicine. In the state of New Jersey, you cannot do that. And you can still be arrested and charged for having any type of cannabis grown in your house, outside your home, things of that nature.
All right, so you just said something I need to probe, because medical marijuana became legal in many places long before, I guess, the general cannabis boom started. What makes marijuana medicine? Did you research reveal any of that? Because we used it for recreation.
Mm-hmm.
I say we, I'm talking about my generation. This is not personal confession. but we were introduced to marijuana as recreation. So there was wine, vodka, rum, and marijuana. When did marijuana become medicine?
To be honest with you, marijuana has always been medicine. I think marijuana was medicine before it was recreational, right? Marijuana was medicine before it was adult use. So, if you think back to, just the uses of hemp in the past, right? That was used for years, centuries prior to cannabis becoming illegal. And when you think about the medical properties of cannabis, we have an indoor cannabinoid system in our body that lives. Cannabinoids are within the cannabis plant, right? A lot of ways that you think about cannabis, and advocates and doctors alike would say, we're essentially giving our body what our body already has in it and what our body needs, right? So as a lot of people think about, a lot of people think from the scope that they're using it recreationally or from an adult use standpoint. But cannabis can help with loss of appetite. Cannabis can help with digestion. Cannabis helps tremendously with migraines, with long-term pain, arthritis that some of the folks, the wiser folks in our community, experience, right? There is so many different things that cannabis, both THC and CBD, are able to provide medically, that it's really endless. And
wait, CBD is, I take CBD. I'm taking marijuana.
So CBD and you have to understand CBD and cannabis essentially derive from the same place, right? But the difference in CBD is that there's no psychoactive properties, right? It does not get you high. You will not feel any type of any of the effects that THC brings with it,
All
right?
right. So, but doesn't marijuana use also impair long-term memory? That's what we were always told you. If you smoke weed, when you get old, you won't remember anything.
Yeah, listen, there's a number of things that have been told to us about the cannabis plant. As cannabis becomes more prevalent and different research institutions are starting to step in the game more, we're finding out that it doesn't have such an effect on your long-term memory, right? We're finding out for a lot of women that are pregnant that it's actually safe to consume for women that have hyperemesis and different things that could cause actually worse problems for a child, right? So there's a lot of things that are being studied and being found now that frankly people were just afraid to study before. And when you don't know the answer, you make up the answer. And you often make up an answer that makes sense for the community at large, the government, whatever worked at that time to scare people away from cannabis are a lot of the stories that are sticking now. But a lot of the research and a lot of the institutions that are stepping into cannabis are essentially day by day, replacing those misnomers with fact.
All right. That's enough of that. Let's go to the money because you're scaring me already.
Nothing to be scared about.
Let's talk about economics. Jay, if I want to go into the business, let's walk through it slowly, step by step. Step number one is what?
Step number one is doing your research. Step number one is taking a deep dive and figuring out exactly how you want to get into the industry, right? Because there's a few routes to take. You can choose to be plant touching, right? Which means that you're either cultivating the plant, processing the plant, retail, distributing the plant, or delivering the plant, right? You can also choose to come in from an ancillary standpoint, which is similar to what I'm doing, right? Where I'm a service partner of the industry. I provide risk management and consulting services for a lot of the large operators in the world.
You do that right now.
Correct. And from that perspective, there's a couple ways to think about it, right? So I liken the cannabis boom to, the gold rush, right? You had your folks that got out there with their picks and their shovels, and you had the folks that made the pickaxes, the shovels, and the buckets to be able to supply what the industry needed to be able to bring it to fruition. So you have to decide, do you want to touch the plant or do you want to be in a technology company, a supplier of products that they need to be able to affect the industry from the outside in.
So it's a kind of supply chain analysis, and you want to figure out what link in the chain you'd like to be.
100%.
It's not likely that any entity or individual would be the whole chain.
No, not, and some states kind of don't allow that, right? So the state of New Jersey, with the new licensing process that they're coming out with, doesn't allow vertical integration, right? And vertical integration means you're doing everything from seed to sale. You are the supply chain, right? And one thing I would say New Jersey did correct in that is, allowing, your startups, your smaller companies to be able to take a piece and get a piece of the industry rather than your large publicly traded multi-state operators that are already here in New Jersey kind of taking over the industry.
And which part of that supply chain is probably going to be most accessible for the average small Black business owner?
Yeah, so most accessible, I would say, just from a standpoint of a lot of work on the front end and less capital intensive, would be micro licenses. So what they've offered in the state of New Jersey is micro licenses for those that there's special consideration on micro license front with one, you have to put it in a community that you live in. Two, you have to be a New Jersey state resident, has to be the majority owner of that company. And you're also, so say if you're in cultivation, you're not allowed to produce more than 1,000 pounds a month. Let's say if you're in retail, you have to fall under a certain square footage, which I believe is 2,500 or 5,000 square feet. So the good thing about micro licenses is, after you've shown that you are, you've been a good company, you've been in good standing, for I believe it's 24 months, you can go to the state to be able to accelerate your license to a full-scale license. So there is a path to become full-scale if micro is where you want to start.
And what about the capital involved in starting a micro license business? Is it expensive? Is the license itself expensive? I mean, what's involved in trying to obtain a micro license?
Yeah, so I would say, let me talk from just like a full-scale license perspective, and then I'll kind of narrow it down to where the micro license is a little bit different, right? And we talked about kind of the steps that we were taking to be able to get into the application. So, first step is doing your research. Second step would be hiring an attorney that has actual cannabis experience, preferably somebody who has experience with intellectual property and protecting intellectual property, right?
Why intellectual property?
So, and you have to understand, in cannabis, intellectual property is pretty much all that you have, right? A number of companies are growing cannabis, number of brands are launching, but what's going to make your brand different, right? You need to, one, have a trademark and intellectual property attorney to be able to trademark your business, and to be able to make sure that your genetics, your trade secrets, those things that are making you different or making you a viable company are protected from other companies.
Yeah,
right?
but weed is weed, right? It's like tobacco,
Nope.
it's cool.
Not like tobacco.
Girl. I mean, what could I say or do to distinguish my weed from your weed?
Yeah, so there's a number of different things that you could do. And so with the comment, weed is like tobacco, it's not like tobacco in the sense of, listen, I should know more about tobacco, my dad being from North Carolina, but there's a tobacco plant. There's a couple different ways you can go with tobacco, right? You can add a number of things after to kind of change the presentation of the flavor. Cannabis is totally different, right? There's genetics within cannabis that make up millions, hundreds of thousands of different strains of cannabis that all create a different either feeling or are geared towards helping a certain ailment, right? Mm-hmm. So from a cannabis perspective, you have companies, you have genetic companies, cultivation companies that they specifically spend years hunting different phenotypes, which are essentially the seeds and the different types of ways that plants can go, just to be able to create their own strain, right? That strain is their intellectual property. That process of how they got to that and the years that they spent in order to get to that, and the strain that they created, which is different than the other 100 strands that are similar to that around the country, is the true intellectual property, right?
Yeah, so this is more than just planting a seed, cutting a leaf, and bagging it. This is a very sophisticated, scientifically based industry that requires, as you said, the first step is research and expertise.
100%. And it is the intellectual property side of the business. Now you have a lot of large cannabis companies that are starting to trademark certain strains, right? So a lot of these different cultivators and businesses around the country will either have to pay to lease or buy those different genetics in order to be able to call it anything similar to what those companies are calling.
My goodness. So let's go to the other end. If I just want to invest, I don't want to grow, I don't want to be in the supply chain. I want to invest in some aspect of the supply chain to get a return on my investment. Where does a guy with $10,000 look to find an investment opportunity?
Right. So, listen, there's a number of publicly traded cannabis companies, a lot at this point, where there are some good opportunities as long as you're doing the research with, who are the best companies, what has their financials look like for the past 2 years, what direction are they going in, are they doing a lot of acquisitions? The companies that tend to be more aggressive, the companies that tend to kind of take over more in the space, as long as they're not growing too big, too fast, tend to be, solid investments in the market. Now, person like myself, I'm more interested in investing directly with private operators, right? Meaning there are private operators all around the country, right? At this point, you have I believe 30 medical states or 30 medical states and 15 adult use states, right? Specifically for people that are in our community, why not look at some of those viable Black and brown operators in the cannabis space, which unfortunately make up less than 4% of companies that are owned in the space, to be able to invest in directly.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
4% of the operators are Black.
No, people of color.
Oh, it's not just Black.
Not just Black. I would say we're a little south of 4% from African American ownership perspective in the
So
cannabis.
how do we find them? How do we connect Black capital with Black operators?
Yeah, so one, there's a number of funds that are being built in the cannabis space to kind of address different needs of underserved entrepreneurs in the cannabis space, which would in this case would obviously be Black and brown operators. Also, I'm going to be honest. I mean, Instagram is a great place where you see
Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram is a great place where you see a number of popular as well as up and coming cannabis companies that could be viable, for investment. Also, tapping into different sources within the cannabis industry. So someone like myself, I work with tons of operators from around the country. At this point, I have clients in every medical state and adult use state. There's other folks that focus specifically on finance to be able to connect with.
So you're dealing with those clients as a risk expert, correct?
Yeah. So what I would say for myself, I'm involved in cannabis in a number of different perspectives. I have helped certain companies be able to get licensed. I help certain operators be able to raise capital along with their risk management needs, right? So I like to be an extension and a resource more than just their broker, so to say, on the insurance side. And the larger kind of multi-state operators that I work with, the publicly traded companies, I try to find a way to find a seat at the table for my Black and brown operators to be able to plug them into those supply chains, of these large, hundreds of millions of dollar cannabis companies, to make sure that they'll be able to get revenue and get included from that side as well.
You mentioned in one of your opening remarks the access to venture capital. Not every company is a good venture capital kind of connection. Not every small business should be seeking venture capital. Where do you think in the cannabis industry the venture capital meets? What's the sweet spot for the small cannabis business?
It's tough for me to say. Honestly, on the venture capital side, you do have some folks that will invest to a startup, meaning brand new, meaning they don't have financials and haven't produced before. But you don't see that often. Really, you're only going to see a VC kind of jump into somebody pre-licensed or a brand new cannabis company if they have a personal relationship or they have skin in the game from some perspective. Normally, most VCs are going to want to see somebody who's had positive EBITDA, positive growth, kind of year over year for at least 2 to 3 years before they're jumping into the pot. With that being said, I think it has to make sense from both sides, right? And and I know, venture capitalists, they tend to be aggressive, right? And I think there are ways to raise capital to make sure that you're keeping more of your equity and more of your ownership as a company.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns. A lot of companies are looking for venture capital, but at the same time, they want to hold on to most of their equity. And if you're not willing to give up a big piece of your equity, then you shouldn't even be looking for venture capital. Of course, the theory is that the upside is expanded exponentially if you take VC money. And so it's better to have a smaller percentage of a big pie than a big percentage of a small pie. But I just think people who hear the term venture capital need to have expert advice on their business to ensure that their business is a good fit for venture capital. Yeah. So you're kind of a one-stop shop cannabis industry expert.
Sure. Yeah, we can go with that. I don't like to call myself an expert because I'm learning every day. I learn new things every day. I'm constantly learning in the cannabis space. Anybody that tries to tell you they know everything is lying to you.
That's what experts do. Experts learn as they
Correct, but I have been working in the cannabis industry for some time, even while working for corporate America and having connections to the West Coast and working with brands and companies out there. You know, I've been doing it for a while. I've seen a lot.
What attracted you to this industry?
Honestly, you know, it's my passion for cannabis, and honestly, because I believe that the plant has a ton of medical properties, and should be looked at for alternative methods of treatment. You know, I tell, you know, I'm a medical patient in New Jersey, but also use cannabis recreationally, and a big part of the reason that I say that is so that people can understand that the stigma of cannabis is essentially just a stigma, right? A young, sharp gentleman like myself who's buttoned up and SVP of an insurance firm consumes cannabis. And there's not a lot of people that you can point to in this world that outwork me from a standpoint of in cannabis industry, in the corporate America world, or actively as a father, right? I think we need to speak up about the facts that a lot of the lazy comments and stoner comments are not in step with where we are in today's society. So those are really the things that drove me to cannabis, and honestly, just seeing you know, people's life improve from using cannabis medicinally, and also seeing the opportunity of building wealth for specifically our community. Cannabis is a $20 billion industry at the end of 2020. That's 40% raise over a year prior. When you start looking at that, this is something that is only going to happen one time. You're not going to see a boom like this, and I liken it to the boom of tech. You're not going to see an industry that's growing this fast, affording this amount of possible wealth in our lifetimes again. And that's my main thing, to spread the message for people to get educated and figure out how you want to get into the industry to be able to impact lives around you.
Is this a global phenomenon, or is this pretty much an American phenomenon?
No, it's global. You have to look at, you know, Mexico is federally legal, Canada federally legal. You're going to have a number of different countries that start to decriminalize and then make it federally legal. Absolutely. I mean, when you talk about when you look at places like Israel, I mean, those guys are far along in their research of cannabis on the medical side than pretty much anybody in the country.
That's right.
Anybody in the globe.
You know, you use the term federally legal. There is some tension here, because in a state like Colorado, for instance, that came on early for adult cannabis use, there's some conflict between state laws and federal laws. You can be innocent on the state level and you can be convicted on the federal level. Where is the United States as it relates to synchronizing the federal legalization with the state legalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still some years out. I think everybody's intention is starting to go in the right direction. You know, you have Chuck Schumer, who is, you know, reportedly preparing a bill for federal legalization to be put forth. I'm thinking sooner than later. You do have certain legislation, such as safe banking legislation, which I think will help steer towards federal legalization, which will at least allow banks and financial institutions to be more comfortable about getting into cannabis before federal legalization, which in turn will help put more institutional money and allow, you know, federally FDIC insured banks to actually start lending and start receiving cannabis dollars.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges. You know, I'm in banking, and if the federal government says that a certain business like cannabis is illegal, then federally chartered banks are taking tremendous risk in having money flow through their institutions that support an illegal industry from a federal perspective. And so I guess now there's a lot of cash being exchanged. What about cryptocurrency? Is that, you know, are people covering their operational costs with Bitcoin or XRP or another crypto?
Yeah, I mean, cryptocurrency is, starting to be prevalent in the marketplace in general. We are starting to see it a little bit more in the cannabis space. But again, I think, some folks are kind of jumping into that niche, but I think some cannabis companies are already under the understanding that, hey, we're already federally illegal. Let's not make things harder by then adding crypto to the mix.
Double trouble, yeah.
Which then, yeah, but of course it is used by some operators. I think, we spoke about kind of the line between federal and state. And just to dive a little bit deeper, it's funny because if you're a legal company, meaning you have a license within a state, let's say here in New Jersey, you still have to file state and federal taxes. So even though, because that is how you will get immediately in trouble with the Fed, is if you're still not filing taxes. And it's funny to think about, it's not legal, but you still have to file federal taxes. And the portion that comes into, and this is just information for everybody and also to do research if you're thinking about getting into the cannabis industry, there's something called 280E tax in the cannabis industry. So normal business write-offs that you have as a normal business, where you're able to write off the taxes, your property taxes, everything that relates to your business. In cannabis, the only thing that you can write off are expenses that are direct result or directly involved with your cost of goods sold, right? So a lot of the things you can write off normally for a business are not write-offs.
Wow.
Not to mention that you're taxed at a much higher rate than a normal business is.
That's like politicians that take bribes. Often when they are incarcerated, it's not for taking the bribe, it's for not reporting it on their taxes.
Exactly. Exactly.
So if you take a bribe, the IRS wants you to report it. So the bribe is illegal.
Right.
This is very interesting. First of all, James, I can't tell you how impressed I am with your knowledge of and your engagement with this industry. Preparation and research is the key to anything, and you certainly have. You've dived into the content and the subject matter in ways that are just commendable. And then you are ahead of the game. You're in on the ground floor. And the fact of the matter is 10, 15 years from now, there will be people who will hear about the opportunity and what it was, just like you said, like technology. There are people who could have bought Apple stock for $1,000 15 years ago, and today they'd be multimillionaires. So it's an important understanding. If you told me 3 years ago that I'd be sitting here under the dfree brand talking about selling weed, I'd have told you off in different languges. But
we probably started talking about it 3 years ago, though. But yeah,
it was private talk. It wasn't. There's no cameras around.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct.
It's very interesting. How I'm going to ask you two more questions. First, how would I find my way into an investment opportunity should I choose to invest? Do I just Google cannabis investments? How would I find my way from this webinar to an opportunity to invest?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, just like we talked about, kind of on the front end, whether you're trying to get into cannabis or invest in cannabis, it starts with really doing your research, right? The same way that you would do your research and you're investing in any stock, right? Is, look at the company, look at the viability of the company, take a look at their financials and the trajectory in which they're going. And, also do some research about the company, right? Have they made some acquisitions? Are they growing in the space? Maybe they're going to get acquired. One thing about the cannabis industry is it is very fast paced and very, very, I wouldn't say volatile, but we can use the word. We can use the word volatile. If you think about, we just had an acquisition for $2 billion in the cannabis industry yesterday. So really taking a look at the companies that kind of lead the pack and deciding also where do you want to get in? Does it make sense if they're at, $17 to buy now? Or is that the peak of where their stock is going to be? So, I would say normal investment research practices. And when it comes to stock, outside of those companies that have gone public through a SPAC, you have to take a look at the Canadian Stock Exchange, the Ontario Stock Exchange, because these companies are not publicly traded within the US.
By the way,
Outside of,
Jay uses these terms and forces me to either confess my ignorance or to explain. A SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company. Their nickname is blank check corporations. It's when people assemble capital for the purpose of doing something. And the something is undetermined, but the people have enough confidence in the principles to invest money in a SPAC, this special purpose acquisition company. And what a SPAC will do is look for an acquisition to take it public and to give a significant return on people's investments. Jay, you can't just throw terms around.
I was gonna get into it, but now that you've explained it, if you think about the concept of a SPAC, it's probably a perfect vehicle for a cannabis company to try to, I don't want to call it a loophole, but get into our market here in the US through a special acquisition company.
All right, so
longer.
Answer this question. And your father's a deacon, your mother's deaconess. I'm still a pastor. About 49 days left. And if you heard, and I train people in becoming directors in corporations, public and private, but mostly public. I serve on the board of a couple of public companies. If you heard, and your parents heard, that I had accepted an invitation to be a director of a cannabis company, how would you explain that to your parents who are deacons and deaconess in the Baptist church?
You got to understand, my parents, I give them credit, are a bit more progressive because they are my parents and they've been hearing this for the past 5 or 6 years. So my parents are very knowledgeable about the cannabis industry and kind of, how all things relate, and also very supportive. I give them a lot of credit. My mom always jokes that she sent me to Howard to get
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about me.
I got you, to get my PhD in weed. I think it's hilarious when she says that. But, if you were to accept the offer to be a director of a cannabis company, first, I would hope that it was my cannabis company. But second, you have to look at, you have to liken that to just a fast growing industry. I mean, honestly, you just have to say Pastor Soares is getting in on the front end, right? He's making sure that he's part of the conversation, and just in knowing you and your history, I'm sure that whatever company you chose to set on, whether that was large, middle market, or small, knowing you, it would probably be a publicly traded cannabis company, that you would find a way to make opportunities for the people in your community, right? You would find a way to tie back the education, the economic value, and just the overall opportunity to folks that are in our community, right? Because I think that's the main thing that's kind of missing, and why I'm so passionate about it is this is something that I don't want our folks to miss out on, right? Whether you have cannabis experience or you do not have cannabis experience, whatever experience you have can be transferred into the cannabis industry. If you've worked for big pharma before, and you've done pharmacovigilance plans, or you've done product recall plans, there's a space for you in cannabis. If you're a doctor, if you're a scientist, there are going to be private licenses that are put out that allows different labs to come forward, because they're going to have to test this cannabis, right? So my explanation would be that you're doing something, you're trend setting, you're doing something that's on the front end, and honestly is only going to help our community and hope find a way to build and bridge the wealth gap, because we sure need a vehicle in order to do that.
Well, there's no question that this is a growing industry. It's not going away. There are proven benefits to the products. It's complicated. It requires research and great expertise. And I, again, commend you for being one of our leaders, in our thought leaders, and one of our professional resource leaders. We're going to have more of these conversations. I've got to figure out a way to help more people understand it. The only thing worse than not knowing is having access to knowledge and not accessing the knowledge. And This is something that just, it cannot be ignored. It cannot be swept under the rug. And there are going to be winners whose victories could have been expanded if more people had known about it. And that's my job. My job is to connect opportunity and information to our community for the betterment of our people. So suffice it to say, that's all we have time for today. What haven't you said that you would like to say to ensure that the most important things on your mind have been a part of this conversation?
Yeah, I think in closing, I just want to speak to everybody in our community, specifically the wiser community. I say wiser because I don't say old. Y'all are wiser, been around longer, know a lot more than we do. Is open your mind and hear this conversation, right? Really be open to this conversation, and trust me, I understand the stigma that comes along with cannabis. I understand, for centuries, even in the state of New Jersey, the Black community has been arrested at 3.5 times the rate of our white counterparts. We've been, unfortunately had to pay the brunt for the war on drugs, right? But as a community, as a people, we are responsible for starting this industry, running it in the legacy market, making it popular, and now today, it being a multi-billion-dollar industry. The issue is we're not putting ourselves in the position or even open to having the conversation to be part of such a booming industry, right? I know that we've seen our brothers, sisters, uncles, mothers, fathers locked up for the cannabis plan. But because things are legal and we do have the experience, we have to demand that we have a space and a place in this industry. 4% ownership in the Black community in the cannabis industry is unacceptable. And I want to make sure that folks around the country that are interested, that want to become part of this, have a resource, have a way, have information to be able to get in, because it is wildly important to the success. And this is truly an opportunity that is not going to come around again. So however I can be a resource, I'll make sure my information is available, and I'll be, interfacing with anybody that wants more information, and would love the opportunity if Dr. Soares and I can continue this conversation in more depth as well.
Yeah, you've heard it. Jay Jackson, a young, brilliant business major from Howard University, a risk management expert, and a pioneer in connecting Black people in America to this budding but growing cannabis industry. I'm going to commit to doing a special series on YouTube with you and some of your associates to continuously bring updates, news, information to our community about the cannabis industry. I'm going to invite you to do a podcast on our dfree podcast platform that we're building. We've got to spread the word. And I just can't tell you how much I admire the depth of knowledge that you gained and your passion for sharing it with other people. So Jay Jackson is answering questions in the chat. His contact information is there also. And I'm looking forward to hearing your responses. I won't see your faces, so that's good, but I want to hear your responses. And if one or two people had questions answered that they've been wondering about, then certainly this has been worth it. So all the preachers out there, we'll pray for each other. All the deacons and deaconess and missionaries, just know it's 2021 and this is our new reality. Don't judge. If you're not into it, if you don't believe in it, just ignore it. But for those who refuse to ignore it, we want to be a great resource for you in terms of your method, your motives, and your outcomes. So God bless you. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget, I'm looking for dfree Juneteenth ambassadors. What that means is this: we're launching a special 30-day project, and I need people who will help us between next week and Juneteenth. Juneteenth is June 19th. And I'm having a special webinar Monday night to invite people to help us not only celebrate Juneteenth on Juneteenth, which we're part of a national Juneteenth Unity Festival, but we're asking people to sign up to help us get our people involved in the dfree online academy. So Juneteenth is not just a day, but Juneteenth is a time of transition from living paycheck to paycheck and wondering what our future looks like, to really empowering and equipping ourselves and our families, our churches, our sororities and our fraternities, so that by the end of the summer, what Juneteenth will mean is more financial freedom. The first Juneteenth celebration from chattel slavery, this Juneteenth is going to be our celebrating our release and liberation from the slavery of debt and delinquencies and deficits. So thank you. If you want to be a Juneteenth ambassador for dfree, just put it in the chat. We'll send you an email. We'll invite you to our Monday night webinar, which will be at 8 o'clock Eastern time. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay in touch with Jay Jackson, because your future is going to be in many ways guided by his knowledge and his mind. So God bless you.
All right, folks, listen, it's 1:02, and that means it's time to let you go. But I want to say to Larry said he's still torn between this recreational use and this burden that so easily besets us. And I would say that's good, because tension represents thought. Nobody wants to hear one presentation and change their minds. On the other hand, no one should be disconnected from a guy like Jay if they're looking for answers. So today, like most times, we're not asking anybody to do anything they otherwise would not do. What we're asking our community to do is to do our homework, to think it through, and pick the options that are best for you and your family. Jay is not here to promote his own company, but we do need to know, Jay, a lot of folk want to know, how do they reach you? I think we need to tell them that.
I'm trying to turn my video back on her. Okay, here we go. Coming back. There we go. Yeah, so, everybody feel free to reach out to me on IG, on Instagram. I'm at JAYJAX80. I also put my my email in the chat, jej@mepinsurance.com. I mean, I'll even give you guys my cell phone number. Feel free to reach out, shoot texts. I prefer over calls, but whatever works for you. 908-705-3944. I want to make myself accessible to those that want this information. I know a lot of people have been asking questions about my company. So, I am SVP of Mark Edward Partners. I work specifically as the head of global cannabis there. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, I am the CEO of a company that is going out for our cultivation and microprocessing license in the state of New Jersey, to be headquartered in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Those that want more information on my company and what I'm launching and some of the things that I'm working on, please reach out to me offline. Again, love to give you information on what I'm working on or be a resource to try to help those get involved that want to be involved.
Yeah, Jay, one of our key dfree churches is a church called the Luke in Humble, Texas, right outside of Houston. The pastor is Dr. Timothy Sloan. His wife is Dr. Sonia Sloan, who is a medical doctor, and she is going to be a part of our series. She was on today. She's got a lot of information about cannabis. She's going to be a part of the series that we do for YouTube, teaching people about the supply chain, the investment opportunities, and all of the cannabis related content that you and I are committed to sharing. So Dr. Sloan, thank you for your willingness to be on. You've been on the team now because your church was dfree Church of the Year. I think the second year we did dfree. So we thank God for you. Thank you, Jay. You were great. Thanks for the chat and the questions. Listen, Janai, Tamika, exactly what's going to happen Monday night at 8 o'clock?
Monday, quick update. We'll talk about Juneteenth. We'll talk about the connection between justice and Juneteenth, and then we're going to connect it back to your journey to financial freedom. Give you about 5 different options of ways that you can support our initiative going into Juneteenth, whether you're an influencer and you just want to spread the word, if you're a leader that wants to lead a class, if you just want to volunteer with the dfree team, if you want to donate. We have a few different ways that you can get active, but we want to take action starting Juneteenth, and you will learn about all those options on Monday.
Good. And let's show a little clip from the Academy itself, so people will know how unique this is. Here's what's unique. What's unique is, there are some online resources that you can just turn on and watch, right?
Right.
And there are other online resources that that you can actually go through. This is the only online resource that you can actually bring to your home, or bring to your church, or bring to your community, fraternity, sorority, and use it live yourself. So you can facilitate it, you can use it, and so it becomes a supplement to what you can do with your own constituency. There's nothing else like it, and it's free.
Right.
So
And you
we'll
don't have
demo
to
that on Monday night, so you can see the power of that. I think it's just brilliant the way it's been done. So listen, I'm a quote Tamika Stembridge. We want to be dfree with money and dfree with time. That means we budget our money and we budget our time. So thank you. Get in touch with Jay Jackson. If you lose his contact information, you can always hit us at info@mydfree.org. And he's on our board. In fact, he's the treasurer. You can see why, because he's rich, on his way to getting more rich. Whoopi Goldberg is his next door neighbor. So, he's doing all right. He's not here.
So now you're gonna don't go Googling, folks. We're not those kind of people. Don't go Googling trying to figure out where people live.
Well,
But no, we're good.
You
I
find
knew
her.
we were getting out of that conversation without that. So.
All right, folks, listen, have a marvelous Wednesday. Have a great rest of the week. We'll see some of you, hopefully a lot of you, on Monday night.
On Monday. Absolutely. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great day.